afraid of this new demographic and new electorate and the possibility of changing elections and public policy all across the country, especially in the South. We are in the middle of a reconstruction that will fundamentally change this nation. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on voting rights. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on union rights. And that's why we're seeing such an attack on public education. And that's why we're seeing the resegregation of our schools. They are afraid of you. We're seeing such an attack on the president. That's why we're seeing people even willing to shut down the government. Do not care. Do not want people to have opportunity. Have you ever seen anything so damn crazy in your life? Damn the cussing preacher. Have you? And I got checked in verse 4 because there was a fig tree one day and it wasn't broken right. It shut down. It didn't produce any fruit. And Jesus damned it too. Something ought to be damned. You get elected by the people, and based on your election, you get free health insurance, and then you don't want other people to have. Y'all might have said that ought to be. Is because when it works, it's going to make a connection to people that your vote really does matter. You know, that if you vote, you might live. That voting goes with living like collard green goes with fried chicken. Y'all feel me? If folks figure that out, they ain't gonna never stop voting. And so that's why they want to deconstruct, they want to stop it, because hope is a powerful force. So the first thing you got to do if you're going to do the AFT, you got to assess where we are in history. You got to understand where we are and why we were born. That this is not a battle against Democrats and Republicans. It's a battle against extremism versus those who believe in the Constitution. It's a battle for the soul of this nation. It's a battle of right versus wrong. Now, once you get the A straight, then you got to go to class and you have to take the F. And the F in your own acronym, I use it tonight to stand for forming alliances. See, if we understand we're being fought because of how strong we are, then the fight should motivate us and not depress us. The fight itself should motivate us to stay together and work together and pull together. Because change always comes in America when we find a way to come together around common good and common ground. Yes, sir. We are not being fought because we are weak. Right. We're being fought because when you build a broad coalition, then you have the ability to shake up things, and narrow-minded extremists understand that. They know their time is limited. I wish, because I have no hatred for any human being, I believe in the redemptive possibility of all people. I wish they could be freed from their fear. I wish they could be freed from their regression. I wish they would use their power to lift people up and bring people together. My, what a beautiful thing it would be. But they tell me that Tea Party tea has an hallucinating effect. They tell me, I haven't drank it, but I've heard it. And they tell me if you sniff too much coke, K-O-C-H, it'll do a job on you. bitter, the prostitute's got to do what the pimp says. And if you're doing all of that, drinking the tea, sniffing the coke, and selling out, it's hard to do right. I hope they will get free. But if they choose not to be free, you and I can't be bound. We must be free enough to work together, and we cannot be lured into thinking that we must be divided or be depressed. Shake your neighbor and say, don't you dare be depressed. And finally, not only must we assess where we are in history, not only must we take the F and form true alliances, we must take the T and tell the truth. If there is one thing we learn in the Moral Monday movement, it is that when you move away from the limited language of liberal versus conservative and Democrat versus Republican, because, you know, I'm liberal and conservative, depending on whether I'm using ketchup or hot sauce. I mean, you can't trap me in language. You hear what I'm saying? I believe I'm a Christian conservative. I believe the other folk are Christian liberals. Because if the main emphasis of the Bible is how you treat the poor and love your neighbor, and if you're always talking about God, but you say more about what God says the least about, and you say the least about what God says the most about, you're not a conservative. I'm a conservative because I want to conserve justice. I want to conserve righteousness. I want to conserve love. I want to conserve treating people. We got to move away from liberal versus conservative, Democrat versus Republican. And when you start focusing on some truths that are deeper than that, values that are more noble than that, you start finding out that truth, telling it, has a way of setting people free from the narrow confines. You know, we've been doing Moral Mondays, Randy, about 20 weeks. And after the 13th week, we left Raleigh, went down. I was invited to a place called Mitchell County. I think Ross set that up. She called him up there and told him to send for me. Now, Mitchell County is 99% white and 89% Republican. And it's right on the corner of Tennessee, right near where the Klan was founded. And I used to be human relations director, so Brother Wong, I know all the states. I used to monitor hate crimes and hate groups. We have more in North Carolina active than Mississippi. And they sent me an invitation to come to Mitchell County. We had 13 weeks of Moral Monday, 900 some people arrested, 15,000 people in Raleigh. And they sent word for me to come to Mitchell County. They said, are you going? I said, hell no, I ain't going. I mean, that's what I said. They don't need to lie. That's exactly what I said. Confession is good for the soul. And then one of the elders in the movement, in fact, one of the white guys in the movement, a guy named Vernon Tyson. The book, Blood Doesn't Sign My Name, is about him being a white minister in Oxford, North Carolina, during the time of uprising. He said to me, Barber, and he's one of my spiritual counselors, he said, you got to test what you believe, son. I said, Mitchell County? I said, 1920, they ran all the black folk out of Mitchell County. He said, you got to test what you believe. So I preached real hard that Sunday morning, like I wasn't going to come back to my own pulpit. I kissed my wife, hugged my children, got in the car. We went up to Mitchell County. Off Highway 40, up the mountain, you can't get back down. It winds 99% white, 89% Republican. Got out of the car at 6 o'clock, about dusk dark. Saw all these folk, none of them look like me. They say, hey, come on in. We walk into this Episcopal church. You can look at it online. And they start singing, blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. Then they looked at me and said, Reverend, we didn't come here to talk about Democrat or Republican. In fact, most of us are Republican. We came here to talk with you about some truths that are bigger than labels. I said, what do you mean? They said, we're not like those Republicans down in the current state house. We don't even understand them. We're more like the Lincoln Republicans. We're more like the Republicans that signed off on the Voting Rights Act in 1965. I know that history. He said, they're extremists because anytime you use your power to hurt people, that's extreme. They said, we want to talk about why public education is important and why it is the truth that we must save teacher jobs and why up here in these mountains that matters, because the only way for our children to get off these mountains is through public education. The truth set us free. They said not only do that, we want to talk about taking care of people, because that's the truth. Up here in these mountains, we believe when somebody's down, you ought to take care of them. You shouldn't cut their unemployment benefits. And we want to talk about labor rights because the railroads have left here and the textile mills are gone. And all of them are gone because we had no labor protection. We had no union protection. And we understand that truth. We want to talk about voting rights and why voting rights are so important and special for those, especially those of us up here in the mountain, because oftentimes we are dismissed by other people. We want to talk about the truth about health care and why it's important for people to have decent health care. And then they said, we want to talk about what Jesus did, the truth when he turned over the money changer and would not let the people who had the money determine the political policy, the public policy. They said, we want to talk about justice. Let's talk about truth. I said, let's do it. And for 3 hours in Mitchell County, number 3 black folk in the room in the county, 99% Republican, 89% Republican, 99% white. We talked about justice. We strategized about justice in telling the truth. The truth set us. I came by to tell you not what I've heard, but what I know now. That if we focus on truth, if we focus on moral issues, the real issue, not this foolishness about prayer in the school, ain't a Bible, ain't a scripture in the Bible about that. Not this foolishness about homosexuality, because your sex life and your relationship life is between you, your God, your priest, and your pastor. But let's talk about the real moral issue. Education is a moral issue. Voting rights is a moral issue. Healthcare is a moral issue. Criminal justice reform is a moral issue. Fair tax policy, that's a moral issue. When I was hungry, did you feed me? That's a moral issue. When I was sick, did you care about me? That's a moral issue. When we focus on these truths, the more noble ideals, we can come together. Telling the truth up there in the mountains, we found out that there's not a lot of difference between mountain populism and civil rights activism. My God. In fact, that night they asked me to lead them on a march in the middle of the night to the home of the Tea Party Republican that they're going to put out. It was at that point I did have to say, now white folk, y'all done gone a little bit too crazy. I said, we'll come back and do that during the day. But I've come to tell you that by assessing where we are in history, by forming alliances, and by telling the truth, doing the AFT, we can build the movement in this country that can turn back this extremism all over this country for the whole world to see. And let me tell you, you won't build it from Washington, D.C. down. I gotta say that to all my national folk. You gotta refix how you work. If you want to build this movement, you've got to empower those from the bottom. Movements are built from Montgomery up, from Jackson, Mississippi up, from Raleigh, North Carolina up. And if we build state movements, grounded in an awareness of where we are, forming alliance, telling the truth, rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values, focused on state capitals, led by the indigenous leaders of that state. If we understand that those state movements are national movements with state movements with national implications, and especially down in the South, we can break open the walls that have divided us. And when that happens,